Foolish Musings. In this episode, we're going to discuss the Upanishads. To begin, we should focus on what the term Upanishad actually means. Upanishad can be translated either as sitting down near, referring to a student sitting next to their teacher's feet, or the term esoteric doctrine, referring to the secretive treatment of these texts throughout most of their history. What these texts actually are an eclectic mixture of philosophy, ritual, mythology, and religion, all of which feeds from the Vedic history of early Brahmanism. Although there are over 200 Upanishads in existence, I have focused my effort on the Mukhya, or main Upanishads, 13 of the oldest and most influential texts within early Brahmanism. I now intend to reflect on these texts as a whole, provide some overarching context, and comment on the diverse ideas they cover, and attempt to close with some key points. Historically speaking, the early Upanishads developed in the Vedic and post-Vedic period following the collapse of the Indus Valley civilization, also known as the Harappan civilization. This culture has been the main centre of urban development in the subcontinent, focused in what is now Pakistan, but also in parts of Afghanistan and northern India. Although the script of this civilization remains undeciphered, many scholars favour the interpretation that this culture spoke a Dravidian language, related to the languages now spoken in southern India, such as Tamil. Although the reason for the collapse of this complex society, which was contemporaneous with Near Eastern societies such as the Babylonians or the Egyptians and even the Mycenaean Greeks, it does coincide with the migration of an Indo-European speaking people from the north who referred to themselves as the Aryans, a term which in their culture meant noble. Now, the language that these newcomers spoke, Sanskrit, would become the dominant medium for the conduct of politics and religion in the north, eventually giving birth to the northern Indian languages of Hindustani, which includes Hindi and Urdu, Bengali and Punjabi. It was in Sanskrit that the Upanishads would be written. There is significant scholarly consternation as to whether the movement of the Aryans was one of violent conquest or peaceful migration, but the impact on the culture of the subcontinent was significant. The newcomers brought with them war chariots, new language, and customs which would come to dominate previous cultures. This included a mythological structure of gods and goddesses, which some have noted as having a distinct similarity with other Indo-European cultures. For instance, the god of lightning Indra, and the Greek Zeus and Nordic Thor. It is during this period that the ritualistic works of Brahmanism, the religion of the Aryans, and the precursor to what would eventually become Hinduism, were formed, known as the Vedas, or knowledge. These texts were passed down by oral tradition, reflected in their other name, Shruti, that which is heard, through the priestly caste known as Brahmins. In these texts we find much writings, including numerous rituals, in order to propitiate the gods, the culture, the customs, and the traditions of the Aryan people, and magical rituals. It was also within these documents we see conflicting creation and etymological myths, which provide the basis for both Brahmanism and for Varna, type, or what Westerners would call caste. Within the Vedas, the etymological myth of Purusha, a cosmic giant who is sacrificed by the gods to create the world, serves as the justification of Varna. Each of the four main groupings in Varna are created from differing aspects of his body, depending upon their role. The Brahmin, priests, were made from his mouth, which once again highlights that link to the oral passage of knowledge. The Kshatriya, warriors and kings, were made from his arms, representing their strength in combat. The Vaishyas, merchants and artisans, were made from his thighs, representing how they maintain the stability of the society and essentially bear the weight of the body through their effort. And finally, the Shudras, farmers and labourers, were made from his feet, representing the very lowly position they occupied in society, but also how they sustained and supported the rest of the societal framework. Those who fulfilled traditionally polluting roles or existed outside this framework were considered Dalits, broken or scattered. or what is commonly known in English as the untouchables. The modern concept of caste, derived from the Portuguese word for race or stock, has much more to do with the complex concept of jati, birth, which includes a person's religion, occupation, language, ethnicity, their geography, and indicates thousands of potential layers, most of which do not neatly align throughout India. However, if one accepts the Aryan invasion hypothesis, the Varna system can be seen as evidence of subjugation of the original inhabitants of the subcontinent, now reduced to Shudras, or the lowest in the caste system. As can be seen, there is considerable disagreement as to the social environment in which the Vedas were developed. Nevertheless, it is in this soil that the seeds of the Vedas germinated, and it is within these ancient texts that we also find embedded the Upanishads. These texts were composed as the Vedanta, the last chapters of the Vedas, and represent discussions of a more philosophical nature. I'll now turn to examine the corpus of texts as a whole and attempt to demonstrate the diversity of opinion that exists within their pages. Some have seen the Upanishads as a reaction against the overly ritualistic and, in some ways, dogmatic actions of the Brahmins. And in this way, they see the Upanishads as a breath of fresh air, with new thought and a more pure and sincere approach towards both religion, philosophy, and belief. This is exemplified in the way that the text appears to reject ritual and reward. In the Chandogya Upanishad, a group of dogs appear to be aping the manners and rituals of the Brahmin priests, chanting, "Om, let's eat. Om, let's drink." This would appear to be a biting satire of the materialistic rituals of the priestly class. However, at the same time, rituals abound throughout the Upanishads, and the Kinyanaka of Videya offers a prize of 1,000 cows to the most learned priest, clearly a demonstration of the material benefits that come with philosophical competence. Does this reflect a streak of more crass materialism, or a rejection of worldly concerns? Another of the focuses of the Upanishads is the relationship between teachers and students, the main method for the transfer of knowledge, and the search for a suitable teacher. One of the best examples of this is in the Katha Upanishad, where the young boy Nachiketa descends into the realm of Yama, death, in response to a curse made in anger by his father. The Upanishads show that the knowledge of the teacher is far more important than their position, with teacher archetypes including Brahmins, kings, talking animals, and even in the Chandogya Upanishad, a character named Raikva the Gatherer, who lived under a cart scratching at his sores, which is certainly a decidedly non-Brahminical position. Furthermore, there is a focus on the secrecy in the transmission of knowledge, with a prime example found in the same Upanishad, with the story of the god and a demon, Indra and Virochana, seeking knowledge from the divine teacher Prajapati. The teacher deliberately misleads the pair and awaits Indra's return, when the god challenges faulty instruction before revealing the truth about Atman, a concept that I will discuss shortly. Two of the most important philosophical concepts that repeat throughout several of the Upanishads is the concept of Atman, which I've already discussed, which means breath, soul, or self, and Brahman. Now this is Brahman, not Brahmin, which refers to the Varna, Brahman with an A. It refers to ultimate reality. There is a focus on attempting to demonstrate the similarity between Atman and the Brahman, perhaps best illustrated through the phrase, "You are that," which is found in the Chandogya Upanishad. This represents a strong idealist streak within the Upanishads, resting upon the rejection of the body and the embrace of asceticism. But this is not the only vein of thought in these texts. One question demonstrates a differing strain of thinking. When a man dies, and his speech goes into the fire, and his breath into the wind, and his sight into the sun, his mind into the moon, his hearing into the direction of the sky, his body into the earth, his Atman into space, his body hair into the plants, the hair on his head into the trees, and his blood and semen into water, then what becomes of that man? Such a question appears either to be pointing towards a monistic interpretation of reality, suggesting that all the universe is fundamentally created from the one substance, or potentially even a materialistic interpretation, where once the individual is destroyed physically, they no longer exist. However, in the Katha Upanishad, we see the allegory of the chariot being utilized to define humanity. Know the self as the rider in a chariot, and the body as the chariot. Know the intellect as the charioteer, and the mind as the reins. The senses are the horses, and the sense objects are the paths. The focus on the self and the metaphysical beyond, along with the chariot analogy seen again in the Phaedrus of Plato, has obvious parallels between both Western and Brahminic thought, although no verifiable evidence exists for such influence either way. In contrast to the above monistic dialogue, this separation of the intelligible and sensible appears to lend itself to an almost dualistic understanding of the cosmos, separating the world of the self and the material. Despite the dissonance between these views, the concepts of Atman and Brahman continue to repeat and rhyme throughout the Upanishads, with great pains taken to demonstrate the unity between the individual self and the greater cosmic whole. One of the better examples is again in the Chandogya Upanishad, when the sage Uddalaka tells his son to take the fruit of the banyan tree, cut it open, and find the seed. He then tells him to cut open the seed. The son finds nothing inside the seed, but Uddalaka tells him that within the seed is the finest essence, on account of which the banyan tree stands here now. That essence constitutes the self of this whole world. That is the truth. That is the self. As part of this cosmic whole, there are several key concepts which are delivered through this very early Brahmanic canon, which provides the basis of later Dharmic philosophy and theology, be it Hindu, Jain, or Buddhist. These include samsara, or the concept of reincarnation, moksha, the concept of liberation, and karma and dharma, the concepts of action and reaction. So samsara is a metaphysical concept which is pushed throughout from a theological standpoint and a cosmological standpoint, the entirety of both the Vedas and the Upanishads. It's the idea that the human soul, which is represented by the Atman, continues to go through a series of rebirths where it will enter the world in a new body and then will leave the world when this body dies, only to come back again. And for some people that might seem as somewhat comforting, the idea that their death is not permanent, but the idea that this continued re-entrance back into the world eventually would just become, well, at least boring for most people, but in some ways a bit of a cavalcade of horror and suffering and pain. And it's this idea of moksha, or the idea of escaping from this cycle of samsara, which is so important for those that want to achieve this sort of concept of enlightenment, this idea of escaping the cycle of rebirth. And this is where dharma and karma become very important, because it's this idea that across the infinite number of lifetimes, that those actions that you take in each of those lifetimes, they have real and tangible effects. Maybe not in this lifetime, maybe in a lifetime down the track, maybe a lifetime several lifetimes down the track. Some of the key quotes from the Upanishads that discuss this include probably one of the earliest examples of a discussion of karma theory. And here they say that a person consists of desires, and as is his desires, so is his will. And as is his will, so is his deed, and whatever deed he does, that he will reap. When we look at that idea of moksha, we also see this concept of the liberation from the cycle of samsara as being a key concept being pushed in these texts. Now, as a man, when embraced by a beloved wife, knows nothing that is without, nothing that is within. Thus this person, when embraced by the prajna, consciousness or awareness, self, knows nothing that is without, nothing that is within. This indeed is his true form, in which his wishes are fulfilled, in which the self only is his wish, in which no other wish is left. He is free from any sorrow. Now, some people may take umbrage with the fact that I've used the pronoun he, his, or any other male, gendered, masculine pronoun in the translation of these texts. However, it's important to note that there is definitely a dualism within these texts and the legacy that they have left behind both on Southern but also world thought. It's a legacy both of universality and marginalization, and I want to discuss this as we bring this session to a close. Within the texts, it's important to realize that the position of women, of the Shudras, the poor, and of those outside the traditional circle of control and power, so the Brahmins and the Kshatriya, are largely sidelined. And it focuses primarily on the considerations of the primarily elite male audience. However, I think it's also important not to overstate this, because the sidelining of these marginal groups is not homogeneous throughout the corpus of texts. This is exemplified with interlocutors such as Gargi, a female of extreme strength, both of character, but also who is taken seriously and is brought into a Brahmanic discussion where she actively challenges one of the other Brahmins. I think overall that despite these shortcomings, the focus on these more universalistic concepts of Atman and Brahman and self and Moshka and samsara are very key to understanding not only a narrow substrata of the elite masculine audience within ancient India, but understanding Southern and world philosophy from a richer and deeper point of view. Secondly, I want to highlight the originality and importance of the notions of samsara, karma, and moksha for later Dharmic thought. These ideas, which first appear in the Upanishads, provide the root for all later Dharmic philosophy and religion, be that Hinduism, Jainism, or Buddhism. Most thinkers in South, Southeast, and East Asia will eventually either incorporate or criticize the metaphysical worldview within these texts, homage to their lasting importance. But it's important as well, once again, as I've already talked about, that we don't necessarily think of these texts as a homogeneous corpus. They're really almost a cacophony of differing viewpoints, all of which are sort of layered behind this sort of esoteric miasma, which makes it very difficult to necessarily pluck at exactly what the author or authors are trying to say. With this in mind, I see the position of the Upanishads as somewhat akin to the role of the pre-Socratics in Western thought, a heterodox collection of thinkers and ideas, providing the base and context within which later great minds would then define themselves. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you liked the episode, you can either subscribe or follow my blog at foolishmusings.com.